Hello, everyone. My name is Randy Harrington, and I know it's taken us some time to get my presentation put together from the last trip down to the Kiamichi Mountains. There's a lot of stuff to put together, the happenings and the audio recordings and the things that happened at that campsite. But I was thinking about some friends of mine down around Broken Bow Lake, and I wanted to do a video about them and a Bigfoot that they affectionately named Big Ed. And I want to actually tell you how I met them. Their name is Rick and Darla. Well, in 2010, I was speaking at a conference at the Boggy Depot, uh, and I believe that was the McGee Creek or McGee Lake, somewhere in central Oklahoma, I think, central south Oklahoma. Uh, but I spent we were doing a conference there for a weekend, and I even camped out by McGee Lake. I think it was McGee Lake, and I spoke with a ranger out there, and I told him what I was doing, and he actually unlocked a gate for me to go back into a restricted area. And I actually spent a couple of nights in a restricted area out there. Didn't have any activity to speak of, so but it was kind of interesting that the ranger allowed me to do that, and very courteous, and to unlock a gate, to go into a restricted area, it's kind of a big deal, and just goes to show you, to be open and upfront with people, and sometimes it will benefit you. So I was speaking at this conference, and after we were done speaking, I was outside of the venue there, which was actually just a pavilion, and I was in the parking lot area, and I was approached by a lady, and her name is Darla, and she said, "Hey, do you mind if I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." And she said that her and her husband had a Bigfoot in an area that they were habituating, and they think a younger Bigfoot ran the older Bigfoot off. And she proceeded to give me the whole story, and and I've got to tell you, I think her husband Rick walked over, we got introduced, and just an amazing story. So you can imagine how great it was for me to hear this. And her question to me was, how could they reconnect with the Bigfoot that they had spent so much time with that has now been pushed out of the area? And I didn't have an answer for that. But of course, I was flattered that they would think that I could give them an answer, but that was new to me. I'd never heard anything like that before, but I'm sure it happens. Uh, so maybe we'll cross this bridge in the future. But let's move on to the location before we get into the story. Okay, here's a map of the whole Kiamichi area on the eastern side there of Oklahoma, and you can see anybody who's watched my videos knows the base camp area where I spend most of my time. So that's the little X way up there in the left hand upper corner. That's Honubby, and that's the X. That's my campsite or my camp area, my camp ridge. So it's probably about 20 miles to the area where the big yellow circle is, and that's down there uh, by the mountain fork. And we will go into the next slide to show you a little closer view. Now, on the mountain fork, there is a concrete bridge that it's got tunnels, culverts through the concrete for the water to flow through. but there are times when the flow of the river is heavy and it'll flow over that concrete barrier. So when it's low, you can drive over it. So it's a concrete bridge basically, and that's where you cross right there. Now, just north of that is, I believe, the Eagle Creek, and then just south of that is the Botuclo Creek. So this crossing is in between those two creeks that dump into the mountain fork there. But the area of interest, okay, so here is a closer view, and you can see that there's a creek in here. You can see where it says Buffalo Bridge, and that whole creek is the Buffalo Creek. So, and it dumps into the mountain fork. So the area of interest that we're talking about is on this creek, Buffalo Creek. Now there are some guys that do some research around here, and I think they call it the Bison area. Well, obviously they call it the Bison area because it's on Buffalo Creek. Uh, you know, they should have been a little sneakier in how they named it. But anyways, so this story is on off of Buffalo Creek. So we'll go to the next slide. All right, so this is the close-up of the general area of interest that we're talking about. So here's the story that was unfolded to me by Darla and Rick. And they have a cabin. They own a cabin that's right on Broken Bow Lake, but they like to camp. So they'll drive to places and pitch a tent. Usually the deeper, darker areas, the better. They just enjoy being out there and the primitive camping. So one night they had worked their way up on this ridge, and it dropped down to Buffalo Creek. So they were not too far from Buffalo Creek, and just on top of a ridge, and they were camping, and they were in the tent and watching a movie on a laptop or a DVD player. Back then, I mean, it was pre 2010, so maybe then maybe they were using a laptop, or maybe they were just using one of those DVD player that opens up. But anyways, so they were in the tent watching a movie, and when the movie was over, Darla had to use the restroom, so she got out of the tent to use the restroom, and something whistled at her, and she jumped back into the tent, yelled at Rick, "Oh my God, did you hear that?" And then they both stepped out. And of course, he was armed, so they both stepped out. But she said it was like something was whistling at her, and so that was the beginning of thinking something's going on. And so they started looking up, you know, Bigfoot stuff online and Bigfoot behaviors and things like that. And they wanted to find out, are we dealing with a Bigfoot here? Is this what's happening? So what they did was they started putting out peanut butter jar baits, and one of the things that they did, they were having peanut butters taken on a regular basis, and it was Jif peanut butter. And they would go up there almost every weekend because they lived in Texas, but they would drive down there to their cabin on the weekends. So every week or two, they would, go down there, and a lot of times they would find the empty peanut butter jar. But initially, when it first started, whatever was getting into the peanut butter was pulling the whole lid and rim off. So it's the plastic jars. So it would just pop open and break the whole rim off. So that's how it was getting into the jar. but it didn't take long to learn how to unscrew it. So whatever was getting in there started off by just tearing open the jar, and that was the weak point. The weak point was at the rim where the lid was attached, and that's where it would get separated. And then it eventually learned how to unscrew them. And so from that point on, the jars were being manually unscrewed, and they would find the jars cleaned out, empty, and then they would replace it with another one. So now there are variations in things that happen over time. They've got a trash bag full of these empty jars, that peanut butter jars that they would collect and then replace it with another one. Now there were some times that they couldn't find the jars, so there were times when the jars could not be found, and they'd still replace it with another one. And then, but there were lots of times that the jar was still there, and of course they would replace it with another peanut butter. Uh, and for instance, there were times when they would find where something had peeled the label from the peanut butter jar. And you know how the Jif label has three different colors, like yellow, green, and whatever other color it was? Well, there would be pinched size pieces taken off of the label. The jar would be stripped of its colors and put in separate color piles. So it would pinch off a green and put it in the green pile, pinch off a yellow, put it in the yellow pile, and whatever the other color was. So that is extremely interesting. That while it was taking the time to eat the peanut butter, it was entertaining itself by pinching off pieces of the label and separating it by colors. I'm not sure that at this point, I think we can safely say that we think we know what was doing it, and it wasn't a raccoon. But it could have been, maybe. I don't know. Anyways, but there's other parts of this story that unfold that indeed we are dealing with the Bigfoot. So they started doing things like one time, Darla brought a she was running a little late. Rick was already up there, and she swung into one of the Dollar General stores and grabbed some generic peanut butter, not a Jif. And so they put out the generic peanut butter, and of course it went empty, but the jar came back with a lid that did not fit. The lid was from one of the Jif jars. So that was kind of interesting. That did it go and try to tell them that we don't like this generic stuff, or that was the only time that well that was the only time that a different lid came with a different jar, because that was the only time they used a different peanut butter. So that's kind of an interesting tidbit. Also, there was one time where Rick took fishing string. I would say about 50 yards or so from their tent is where they would hang it from a string in a tree, is where they'd hang their peanut butter. And one time, he got some 50 or 60 pound fishing string. Maybe it was a 100 pound fishing string. I don't know. But he ran it through the trees and he tied the peanut butter to that. And he tied it to a branch right above their tent. And he said it was 11 o'clock sharp at night when that branch just, he said there was no fiddling with it like a bobber, like a fish fiddles with a bobber, a bait on a bobber, and you just see the bobber get messed with. He said there was no fiddling with it. It was just a snap, where something took the peanut butter jar and was gone, and that branch just stretched and broke immediately. So that's how quick it grabbed the peanut butter and was gone. So that string that was tied to it with a 100 pound test or whatever was no deterrent, and it just took it and was gone. And that branch just bent and broke right over their tent, and it happened at 11 o'clock at night. So that's a good technique. If you want to get an idea of when something is hitting your bait, do it that way. So that happened. And then one time, they were just above the Buffalo creek, and Rick liked to walk down there and fish. So he was down there fishing, and maybe it's a quarter mile, maybe a quarter mile down the hill, and he'd be down there fishing. And he said there were often times where there'd be whistles and rocks hitting the water when he was fishing. And I think that he would just talk to him while he was fishing, let him know that he was there. And one time he was down there, and it's a rugged area. So one time he was down there and he found where a bunch of the empty jars were. There was a crevice, an earth crevice going down into the creek where several of these jars were shoved down into it. So there were instances when the critter or creature that took the peanut butter knew that he would be thirsty at the end of eating that jar of peanut butter. So he'd work his way down to the creek, and once he's down to the creek, finish up the jar, be able to drink, and then instead of taking the jar back up to the campsite, they had a place where they were stashing them down there. So that's interesting. So you got all of these, well, and that's probably where it got the lid to put with the other generic jar that she put out that one time. So those are just very interesting stories. Now here comes the part where uh, they think that, and they affectionately named the Bigfoot Big Ed. They just started calling him Big Ed, especially after it broke the branch over their tent. They're like, well, he's big, so that's Big Ed. And so the next one is where they perceive that he was ran out by a younger one. All right. So here's the part where Rick said the tree that they were hanging the peanut butter in. He said they came back there one weekend and there was a tree about, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet from the base of the tree that they were putting the peanut butter in, and there was a tree broken over at about the 4 or 5 foot mark. And you could see the impressions in the ground where something planted its feet and broke that tree over. And it was facing the tree, the peanut butter tree. And so, of course, they put out another peanut butter. And then the next week they come back and there was a second tree broken over in a different location, about the same distance from the peanut butter tree, but it was broken over facing the peanut butter tree. So there's two trees broken over at about the 4 or 5 foot mark. You can see the impressions of feet on the ground where it broke them over, and they were pointing towards the peanut butter tree. And from that moment on, whatever started taking the peanut butter went back to breaking the jar open. After all that time of Big Ed being able to unscrew the peanut butter, something is now breaking open the jar again. And from what they saw in with the trees broken over, that they thought maybe a new Bigfoot was there taking over the peanut butter bait station. And that certainly makes sense. That would be the only reason that it would go for so long unscrewing the lid and then going back to tearing the lid open. It wasn't Ed anymore. And that was their concern. They felt like they had already developed a relationship with the one before Big Ed, and they were concerned that where was he? And I told them, I said, look, I said, a lot of times in the animal world, very seldom do males kill males. A lot of times it's just display. A lot of times a display is enough to deter another. They don't need to fight. It's unnecessary. Nobody needs to risk injury. So I mean, when it comes to moose and all these other animals, sometimes size matters. And when there's a younger one or a bigger, stronger one, all they have to do is show a little bit of a display and the other one will retreat. I said, so more than likely he's just moved back to where he's allowed to be. I said, so if you expand your baiting station to a different area, you may come in contact with Ed again, Big Ed. I said, because he may just not be able to come to there anymore, because if it was a younger, stronger, bigger one, did his display, showed him who's boss, said he's taken over and did take over. And that is fascinating to me. It is just a fascinating account of happenings that they were paying attention to, all of the things that they did to ensure that what was taking that peanut butter and all of the peanut butter jars and the colors of the label being put in piles and all of those things. It's just fantastic. And my friend Rick and Darla, they gave me a key to their cabin, and they're just like, man, every time you come down here, you need to take a shower or whatever, you can use our cabin. And every time I come down there, they try to show up to my campsites. I've camped there with them in that location. As a matter of fact, I was there camping with them one time, and Rick was making hamburgers, and he forgot to bring a spatula. So I dug around in the back of my truck, and I'm a siding guy. So I found a piece of lath and some vinyl siding, and I cut it and screwed it together and made a spatula out of vinyl siding for him to flip the hamburgers. So it's just kind of funny that we've become good friends. I mean, these people are the cream of the earth, man. Just super nice. I mean, how do I get so lucky to just keep meeting people that are just like this, just down to earth? They love you for who you are, and just great people, and I enjoy their company. And Darla is a heck of a researcher. She goes out on her own, and she's been in some places. And I actually got to go to a place where she went before me and recorded a bunch of stuff happening. And so I went there and then had stuff happen while I was there. So, you meet good people like that, and they openly share, and and you gain from that. I gain from that. I gain every day by having them as friends. Now they don't mind me giving the location out to where this happened, because they haven't been there for years. The logging crews came up there on that mountain, marked all the trees, and cut out a bunch of the trees, and just changed the dynamics of what is going on there. So it's been years since they've been up there, but the story is fascinating. These critters are there, and it's only 20 miles or less from the ridge that I'm on. It's 20 miles or less from the North America Wood Ape Conservancy area. I mean, these things are there. They're from Idabel all the way up to Big Cedar, and all the way back over to Red Oak. And all you got to do is just find you a good spot and camp there long enough and pay attention. There'll be stuff happening. But I hope you enjoyed this story. I know I enjoy it, but I hope you enjoy it. And if you like, leave me a comment and we'll chat about it. Thank you.